Mr. Whiteman, is it true that it was in 1920 that you formed your first famous orchestra?
Well, as a matter of fact, it was really 1919.
Uh-huh.
We came east in 20. We had quite a time. See, I'd been a symphonic musician most all my life. I was the principal viola in the San Francisco Symphony.
Oh, yes.
And but before that, I'd been quite well known in Denver, Colorado, as what was known as a ragtime fiddler. Of course, this was quite a while before jazz.
What was involved in being a ragtime fiddler?
Well, you improvised on the current popular tunes.
And the classics.
And the classics.
Uh-huh.
And your ingenuity got you a little more pay than the other fellow who sawed off the round steak in the regular old butcher fashion. Of course, really, the way the band was formed, as I said, I had quite a reputation as being a ragtime violinist, so when a ragtime violinist lost his job at Tate's Cafe, I was invited to lead the symphony. At that time, I was getting a very bright $20 gold piece a week, and we had to get up early in the morning and rehearse to take his place in the cafe. And, well, I lasted 3 nights, but I did discover one thing, that as we would go along, you see, nobody ever arranged any music at all.
I was going to ask you that.
No, we would just take a piano copy, and then it was everybody on his own, of which each would improvise little choruses and would probably jam out on the end, or as we called it in those days, take a chorus or ad lib. And I noticed that as the evening would go on, we would start pretty badly, and then we'd visit a lot of tables and get in a much more convivial mood, and then we'd commence to play pretty well. And finally, that'd get a little better. Till late at night, it'd get too bad, and then we'd play pretty bad again.
What stage did you do the recording?
I'd also noticed that sometimes we'd play a tune good, and then we wouldn't play it good again for a week. So, as I said, I got fired after 3 nights, and that made me so aggravated about the whole thing that I decided to start a band. And I figured that if I would write down the things that we played well, then at least we would play them always well, which would just go back to my symphonic training of having a score and parts.
And was that the beginning of arranging with jazz bands?
Yeah, we were the first that ever did.
I see, yeah.
And then to get a lot of spontaneity, once in a while we would have purpose rather gay sessions, but we'd keep one fellow not quite so gay, and he would write down any interesting figures that would come out of our improvisation.
Now, who were your arranger? Who was your first arranger?
Well, I did it first, and then I got Freddie Grofe. He was on the same stand with me in the San Francisco Symphony. He was also a viola player. And he was getting a fast $1.50 for choral arrangements, and I used to give him $2.50 for a band reading.
At what stage did Bill Challis come into arranging?
Oh, much later.
Much later.
Wonderful arranger.
I was going to ask you that in those famous records much later, 27/8, when Bix and Tram and Lang were in there, did they take off by themselves from an arrangement?
Well, a good deal.
Yeah.
Although there was very often an indication. Bix had a very peculiar, of course, he was such a wonderful gentleman. And so many people thought he was just an out-and-out wild jazz man, of course, which he wasn't. His wonderful intervals is what made Bix.
Yes.
And it's very unfortunate to this day that we have so few fine recordings of Bix. But you would find on all of Bix's old parts that if he was to take a chorus, he would write 4 or 5 notes to take him away from the band, and always wrote 4 or 5 to get back in, because he thought that was the epitome of rudeness to all of a sudden just bust into something or also return it to the band with no melodic sense. Well, the first singer we ever had was Morton Downey, who was the first singer in any band.
Well, now, Mr. Whiteman, in a word, in all modesty, tell me, what do you think your influence has been on popular dance music? I know we all know it's been immense, but...
First of all, let's don't say it was me. I'm a pretty good organizer, and I think I've had all the fine arrangers, and I've had all the fine instrumentalists. When you go over for instance, our instrumentalists, Jimmy Dorsey, Tommy Dorsey, Henry Buzzy, Jack Teagarden, Little T, Bix Beiderbecke, it's a pretty wonderful list.
Tremendous list.
And, of course, amongst the singers, we had Mildred Bailey and Jane Froman, and I guess the very last to graduate was Mindy Carson, and, of course, that fellow Crosby, he always chirped a pretty fair song. And, of course, among the arrangers and even composers, Gershwin wrote the Rhapsody in Blue especially for us at the first jazz concert that was ever given. And I guess I'm a little corny, and I burn up at some of these things we call jazz concerts. I don't blame people for 3- and 4-hour jazz sessions, but what we were trying to do was to take the music a little out of just the patting your foot every minute and put it in the concert field. In other words, that it would be acceptable with a symphony, which maybe if our organization, let's don't say me, but at least we've had enough influence that all over the world they play the Rhapsody in Blue, they play the Cuban Overture, they play the American in Paris.
Metropolis.
And Metropolis and Grand Canyon Suite. They were all written especially for us. And I say really us, not me.